All right, so thanks for your flexibility with rescheduling the community meeting. We want to take advantage of myself and Alexis being here in our office in DC because we have some of the kit equipment with us. So we figure this hour today will be a time to chat about what's in the Go On and Box kits, share some additional resources in anticipation of the kits coming to those of you on the call who are anticipating them. I touched base with our freight forwarding partner today. They're still working on the paperwork for the customs clearance. She sent me some airway bills. So progress is going forward. It's just still slow and waiting for paperwork on their end, but we'll continue to keep you apprised of those anticipated dates as they get shipped out. But because it's been almost, 12 months, 11 months since we had our in-person training in Fiji, we want to provide a sort of a refresher on what's coming to you, knowing that it might look a little bit different in its boxes as it's packaged than when we saw it last at the training, and help work through the process of setting it up and getting it going once it's finally at your own laboratories.
Yeah. So I think we're going to go through the resources that they'll have access to, like the list first, and then we'll kind of go through the equipment, or how did you want to do it?
I'll just chat through this document that I put together here. So this has links to a lot of helpful resources as you're working with the kit, getting it set up, etc. So the first thing that we'll be going through today is our Go On in a Box kit list. This is a spreadsheet with all of the items that are included in the kit, hyperlinks back to the actual item on the supplier website, and some information on the usage. So I'll show that in just a second. But some of the other items on here are resources for using the kits. So everything where I've been able to find, or Alexis has found, a user guide for the equipment. We've downloaded that, put it on our Google Drive, and linked it in this folder here. So I'll go ahead and click on that. You can take a look. These are all of the quick guides, specifications. So if you're interested in learning more about some of these pieces of equipment, or user guides for things like the multimeter, you can find them in this folder.
I'll note that these were, and I apologize, a card just went by. These were the ones that were developed by the manufacturer themselves. You'll hear about it in a moment, but we're also developing our own sort of guidelines designed for kit recipients who are using these pieces of equipment specifically for ocean acidification. So these user guides are for people who might be using these pieces of equipment for a whole range of purposes, but they're still very useful for things like troubleshooting, where maybe the screen is showing you an error message and you're really not sure what it is. Oftentimes the user guide will give you some next steps for how to troubleshoot that. Exactly.
Thanks. The next resources we put together are the safety data sheets. So these come included with any chemical that's shipped. It includes information on how to safely handle it, how to dispose of it. For example, one of the items we'll be talking about is this cleaning solution, the Alkanox, which is somewhere in here, right here. So it explains how to handle it, essentially that you can dilute it and put it down the sink, for example. So these are, again, all from the manufacturer and are built in a standardized way to understand how to use the chemicals. Of course, always check with your local regulations too. Perhaps your university or the laboratory that you're in may have guidance for disposing of some of these items, but this is a really good starting place to say, like, hey, here's what's actually comprising this chemical. What's the best way to handle it and safely dispose of it? And of course, we'll come back to the mercuric chloride as well. It's a big part of the kit. And if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt during this. We can make it more of a dialogue. But we will be sharing this resource guide with all the links after the session today. So you can take a look and return back to these as you get the kit set up and start doing your laboratory research and field research. The next item on this list is guidance for setting up the electrical components of the Go On in a Box kit. So it's a table that lists some of these items, such as the scale, the multimeter, the spectrophotometer, computer, the CTD diver, and what voltage it expects, knowing that here in the US, things are typically accepting of 120 volts, but knowing it's quite different around the world, we've listed what sort of plugs come with them, but we'll go through some of the additional pieces, yes, like adapters that we've included to connect them to the power sources in your lab, which, as you remember, we customized with you and asked, like, what do you actually have in your lab? And made sure we've got those appropriate adapters in there. But this will just provide a reminder of what needs to be connected to the power stabilizer and transformer, and what can be connected directly to the wall with the appropriate adapters. So I had to think through it a lot, and Alexis did too, when we were making sure that everything hooked up correctly. So we sort of brain dumped in this document here. We have our instructional videos for using the GOA-ON in a box kits. These were put together a couple of years ago with Dr. Chris Sabine demonstrating laboratory techniques. There's a video on collecting water samples, measuring total alkalinity, measuring spectrophotometric pH, and using reference materials. And in a couple different languages. So if any of you want to test out Spanish or something else that you may be learning in addition to English, that's there in the subtitles as well. Perfect. These are perennial resources. When I was first learning about the GOA-ON in a box kit, before I had seen any of this, and I was like, how does this actually work? Watching these videos was super helpful for me. And you might have remembered that we included it in the pre-training resources as well to get a little bit of insight into what we would have been doing that week. The next item is something that Kim is quite familiar with. It's our work on the practical best practices, which is a set of over 20 documents right now describing how to practically conduct oceanification research with the GOA-ON in a box kit. So it's everything from what you should pack in the field to make sure when you're out there on a boat, you're like, oh, darn, I need my gloves or something like that. You can go through the checklist. There's guidance on collecting the bottle samples, storing them, bringing them back to the laboratory, performing the different measurements, doing everything from creating the dye solution to then on the back end, going through the data analysis side, using reference materials, etc. It still is in development. So this is the guide that you saw in Fiji that we had printed out. Still working on putting those finishing touches on it, so it's not publicly available. But if you'd like an updated copy of those guides, those manuals, feel free to email me and I can send you the draft version that we have at this moment. There's not very many updates since when we printed it out about a year or so ago in terms of the actual methodology. At this point, we're just adding a couple of extra documents and putting the finishing touches on those. And hopefully we'll be able to share that soon.
Yeah, and I would say that the way, and Kim, you can add to this as well, the way we've really approached this practical best practices is I think this in many ways will be your documents that I think will be the most important reference guides for you to kind of help you use the kits. These other resources are kind of additional. So like the safety data sheets, that will be, you know, if you're handling the disposal of a particular chemical, or if your university has a question about, you know, one particular chemical and how you're storing it, you can use that as like a resource to find that information, but you're not going to necessarily need it day to day. Same with the manufacturer user guides. Those are really, you know, repairs, troubleshooting. That's not something you're going to reference very often. We built these practical best practices so that if it's been 6 months since you did, you know, an alkalinity titration run or something, it really provides you with the step-by-step instructions so that you will get high quality data and you won't forget the critical steps. And it's designed specifically for this equipment for the purpose of ocean acidification monitoring. And it's been designed by the same people that you've been interacting with. So Kim has been working very closely on the spectrophotometric measurements and also kind of advising on the use of reference materials. Chris Sabine, who you made the videos, he's really been behind the alkalinity measurements and methodology along with Andrew Dixon. So that will be almost like your recipe book, right? Your cookbook that you would be using to cook in the kitchen. And you might imagine that it's going to have a lot of, you know, notes in the margins of as you work on it, and you have your own reminders for yourself, and that'll be printed out and, you know, next to you as you're working. So we will have like a final version of this that we're going to try and publish so that many other people can have access to it. But we will happily share with you our current version because I think it's a really important resource for you as a kit user. It's just that our authors really want to be so confident that it's complete before we officially publish it. That's why we don't have like the final version yet.
Yes. And we recognize Kim again for her great input on the entire practical best practice. She's been incredible. So thanks, Kim. We're lucky to benefit from your expertise. All right, and then the last two things we have linked here are some references from Sunburst Sensors on pieces of the ISAMI pH sensor. There's just a note of what's included in the maintenance kit typically that you'll find included with the ISAMI to do small minor repairs so it doesn't have to get sent back to Montana. There's a little bit more of a some guides on doing some troubleshooting and repair directly from Sunburst Sensors, and here as well with some nice pictures. So we passed this along straight from the manufacturer. We appreciate them putting together these components. But of course, you know, there's a lot of nuances to the ICME, and that's also something that we're working on addressing through further guidance, training for the staff at the Pacific Islands Oceanification Center to support on the maintenance of this sensor.
Yeah, I'll just add there that, you know, there will be difficult, like you will have troubleshooting experiences with the ISAMI. It's just kind of the nature of how it's going to be. And we're working really hard so that the PIOAC staff have a little bit more experience with the maintenance and repair. So we're organizing a short training for hopefully Poate and Azaria and Francis to get some training from Sunburst directly on how to repair the sensors, so that if you're experiencing difficulty with yours, you have someone in region who can help you, and that maybe if someone from your university is traveling to Suva, you can have them bring your sensor, and maybe Poate and Azaria and Francis can help with the repairs, so you don't have to handle the shipment all the way to the US. Also, Sunburst is really, really generous with their time, and they will happily jump on a Zoom call with you. But it helps to have a little bit of that background knowledge so you can kind of start to figure out what might be the problem first, because then they'll be able to help you better. So we're really trying to build out just like a community of support, but hopefully soon kind of Poate and Azaria and Francis will have some more hands-on expertise to really be able to help you if you're running into an issue with your ISAMI.
Yeah, thank you. The last bit of information on here is just related to data submission to the Sustainable Development Goal 14.3.1 data portal. And the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commissions are the steward of this data submission. They have a lot of great resources that we talked about during the training, but I've included them here too. Their website has a great FAQ section. They also have put together a number of webinars over the years to provide more information about that data submission process. I think perhaps one of our later community meetings, we might talk about like, what does that look like doing? How do you connect with the focal point in your country, or, you know, finalize your data for submission? I know Kim has a lot of experience with that as well. But these are some resources if you're just looking for a little bit of a quick insight into what that looks like. They are linked at the bottom here. So again, we'll share this after the webinar today with all these links, so you can have that to look through when you need. Right now, are there any questions? Alex.
Hi, thank you so much. This resource list is really great and really thorough. I know you're going to send it to the people on this call. I'm just wondering, is this something we can share publicly, like via GOA-ON, like outside of this group, or where does that stand with sharing this list?
You know, it's a great point. I think we can probably host it on the Ocean Foundation's website. We've got a page on our website about kind of low cost technology, so we could probably put it there so it's hosted.
Yeah, if you could just send me the link when it's up, I think it would be, we'd love to.
We can request
share it.
Post it on the website. Is that Taco?
Yes, sorry.
Perfect.
That's her dog, so you know who I'm talking to.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. So the rest of our time together, we're going to go through some of the items that we have here in the office today. It's not everything. It's basically the leftovers from when we ordered the kits that are headed to you that will be going to future kit recipients. So we'll show you what we have and just talk through those. But again, this kit list that we're sharing here is public. I keep it updated whenever we add a new component to the GOA-ON a Box kit. Whenever I learn more about an item or find a better supplier, I make sure to link it in here. And so this is a good resource to return to. If you get your kit and you pull out a box and you're like, what is this? Like the labeling isn't very clear. There's just like some, you know, company name on it or a model number. You can go in this spreadsheet and be like, oh yes, that is the power adapter for this item, and hopefully, you know, sort it out that way. But we're going to show you what those items that we have in the office look like today and their packaging. So you can get a sense of, you know, what goes into the field equipment, what goes into the laboratory equipment, and then what are sort of like the helpful odds and ends that we've also included for laboratory work.
Do you want to share this link in the chat in case they want to
Oh,
follow
yeah,
along?
great idea.
Yeah. So we're going to do a little bit of show and tell, but please interrupt us at any time if you have a clarifying question or additional questions. We've kind of set up some things next to us. And yeah, but please, you know, jump in, raise your hand or interrupt. Because this is for you and we just want to do things that are helpful.
Yes. All right, so the first part of the kit are the pieces that are deployed out in the field. We don't have any ICMEs with us because they are made by Sunburst as they're ordered, but we do have a couple of the CTD divers used for the conductivity measurements. Of course, looking like this guy right here, the nice ceramic case. It also includes the reading unit to unscrew the top of the CTD diver and then connect it into the reading unit, which gets plugged into the laptop.
I think that, you know, one thing about this device is that it's not finicky like the iSammy in that you're not really going to ever take this apart because it's a really neatly packaged thing. It is, because it's ceramic, it can break. And I think we saw this at the Fiji training, but that's only really like if you drop it, it's not likely to, it doesn't have the same delicacy as the iSammy in terms of like the wiring coming disconnected. That said, it is good to continue to calibrate this to make sure that you're getting the readings are accurate. And we will be sure to provide some guidance on how to make sure that you're continuing to get reliable readings on your CTD. It's really nice how small it is. Because, you know, you don't have to worry about having some fancy rig. You can deploy it very easily off of your boat. And I believe these are rated to 20 meters.
I think it's even deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these can go quite a bit deeper than the iSammy. So if for some reason you're interested in having, you know, the salinity and temperature at a different depth, like these can go quite a bit deeper. So just something to consider.
Cool. We've also included the GPS units, which we have in the office. Here we go. So as you're out in the field and, you know, deploying your instruments on a frame and there aren't clear markers to come back to it, you can log the location on the GPS unit, and hopefully it's easy to find for yourself. And maybe not as, you know, if you don't have like flashing lights and bells and whistles that might be obvious to, you know, fishers that are interested, for example. I know the field site at the fish patch in Suva has had some, you know, issues with the buoy being cut, the marker being cut and finding it again. So if you do have those secondary pieces, the GPS is still a good backup to be able to find it later on when you come to service it and collect the data. The next item we have right here is our laptop computer that's included. So we have that right down there. Awesome. So you'll have a laptop case with the laptop itself inside. It's a Lenovo ThinkBook, so it should handle all of your data analysis needs. We've also included travel adapters that will connect to the power supply and plug directly into the wall. And just some odds and ends like a mouse and things like that as well. This comes preloaded with Microsoft Office on it. So you'll have access to Excel, Microsoft Word, all those good options for, you know, doing the data analysis and writing it up. All right, and then our next section on this kit list is focused on the discrete sampling, so taking bottle samples and then bringing them back to the lab. We don't have the water collection sample bottle with us here. That will be included. The tubing connects to that though to fill up water samples, just fill up the water sampling bottles, or as you can follow along in Chris Devine's video, even sample from the surface if that's part of your research plan. We include, of course, all the sample bottles. I think everyone is getting at least 72 of those. So you can collect bottle samples and then sort them in the lab until there's, a convenient day to do those measurements, break open a reference material and, measure maybe samples from the last couple of months or so.
Yeah, and we really, I think you probably mentioned this in the, oh, Kim, that's super exciting. We mentioned this probably in January. Well, I wasn't there in January, but I'm sure Caitlin mentioned this. It's really useful to kind of run a lot of samples in one day and also run some like junk samples first to really just make sure you're kind of like you're good, you're feeling good, like that you're getting consistent results. And so you can kind of just have some seawater, right? Just like a big bucket of seawater, and just run those as your junk samples. But then be prepared to run a nice big batch of your samples, and having them all together also allows you to efficiently use that reference material that it allows you to really be confident in your results, that you can use the reference material. But by running all of your samples that one day, you can feel confident that you kind of warmed up, you got your junk samples, you felt confident that you were being consistent, and that you were able to really utilize your reference materials to be confident that you were being consistent and calibrated with your results. That does mean that it requires really planning, because it's time intensive to do the alkalinity titrations. The other thing is that you have to do the pH measurements first. And so you have to build in that timing. So that's something that will probably be discussed in the cookbook, and maybe is like planning how you do your analysis, but just things to consider, right? As you think about the timing, is that, you can do the field sampling in advance. The only negative is that as those bottles store up, you have fewer to go out and use in the field, but there's 72. So that's a good amount, right? And then consider, when can you block that time to really do what you need to do as far as doing the proper order of analysis.
Yeah, if Azaria were here, she could share a bit more about her experience of, she goes out and collects the bottle samples on a monthly basis, but is measuring them, I think, around every 6 months or so. On that time frame. So, getting a good batch together and then spending time at the USP lab. And as Kim was nodding during the idea of, saving up and doing the spec pH measurements first, she's written a whole great document, maybe a couple of documents in the practical to best practices about those sorts of considerations. So that will be forthcoming too. Since we're on the topic of the bottles, we can also chat about the items that are used to seal the bottles, which I remember us practicing together. So we have, of course, the clips and then rubber bands as well to properly secure those. We'll also include the Epision grease, which my understanding is aerospace grade. So it's quite good and quite expensive, but really gets those bottles a nice airtight seal so they are stable in the lab until the measurement time. To complement that, for stability is the mercuric chloride, which can be dispensed through the plastic dropper bottles that we will include here. It's made up in a supersaturated solution that's also described. I think it's described in the best practices. Should check on that. But that's the best way to add the appropriate number of drops into the sample bottle.
Just a note on the mercuric chloride, because Lyndon and Maisie, I don't know if you're aware, we are working on providing some guidance in case there's questions within your institution or your government on disposal. We're really lucky that within the Ocean Foundation, there's a lawyer on staff who previously worked for the government of Mexico on the Minamata Convention as it relates to mercury and mining. So she's very, very familiar with the Minamata Convention. And she actually met with the Minamata Convention Secretariat, and they had no idea that mercury was used in these very small quantities for ocean acidification. And so what we're hoping to do is actually create a protocol for using mercuric chloride for ocean acidification that has been endorsed by the Minamata Convention as compliant with the Minamata Convention. That's our goal, to have something that has been endorsed as compliant with the Minamata Convention, so it provides that really clear documentation for you if there's any questions within your institution, your government, about are we complying with the Minamata Convention, since a lot of countries, it just came into force in those countries. But really the convention was designed for large quantities of mercury used in industrial settings like mining. It really was not intended for these extremely small uses. So our colleague Alejandra is confident that we'll be able to write this. I can't promise anything, but that's what we'll be working on the next few months.
All right, so continuing on with the items for supporting field sampling, we have the thermometer probe, which comes in two parts. So you'll need first the probe itself, which then connects to the reader unit here. This can be used or should be used both in the field to measure the temperature when you're collecting the bottle sample. So when it's time to input those data into CO2 sys, we know what the field conditions were like. Also a good resource in the laboratory when doing the spec pH measurements and the total alkalinity measurements to take the reading at the time of measurement as well. We used to include a small glass thermometer, but after work with Christina, and you remember her maybe doing some tests while we were at the training as well, we decided that wasn't at the accuracy level needed. This is instead much more high quality, so you can have it in the lab, then go out in the field, remember to pack it in your to-go kit as well. So you're able to take those high quality measurements in both places.
Yeah, it has this nice small probe tip and it's quite long. So it's pretty easy to use in a variety of settings.
Great. And then the last couple of pieces for that relate to cleaning the bottles. So after you've done your measurements, dumped out the sample, which we'll discuss, we have to clean the grease off the bottles. So the way that we're doing that is this powdered cleaner called Alkanox. It mixes up with water, so you can put it in a tub, soak the bottles in there to start to loosen up the grease. And then we have a couple of brushes as well. So this should fit through the mouth of the sample bottles and give it a good scrub in there with this cleaner. Is probably the easiest way to take off the grease. Other labs will do things like burn off the grease or put it in some sort of muffle furnace. But knowing that not everyone may have access to that, this soap is the best process we've come up with to make sure to get all that grease out. So the bottle samples are clean and ready for the next batch of samples, and that grease isn't sort of floating around in the sample. In my previous lab where I worked, the pH electrode wasn't functioning properly. And after months and months of sort of troubleshooting, the PI realized it was probably trace amounts of the grease floating around in the sample and sort of coating the bulb and really reducing the response time. And so this is what the lab ended up working with to clean the sample bottles properly. So it reduced those sorts of issues going forward.
Right. Do you want to talk about the mercury filtration or the analysis?
Let's go with that.
Analysis. Okay.
First, any questions now that we've covered the bits in the field? Okie dokie. If anything comes up, pop it in the chat. Oh, see something in the chat. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Daisy. Alrighty.
So what's first?
pH analysis.
Shall I do pipette?
Let's go through the ones that we don't have. So we don't have the spectrophotometer here because it's quite large and expensive, so we don't have extras. We do have the cuvettes. Oh my gosh, I opened it wrong earlier. We've included plastic cuvettes. Lyndon, I think you have a couple of glass ones coming specially in your kit, as we discussed. Yeah, awesome.
So the cuvettes are what you use to load your sample. We asked you again in the customization process whether you preferred plastic or glass. If you preferred plastic, the benefit is that there's quite a few, so you don't have to worry about breaking them. You can use the Kim wipes to make sure that there's no smudges, because you want to make sure that the pathway is clear for the reading. But essentially, this will be what you use for processing, getting that data for your pH. So this should look familiar from the training.
And then open the foam case carefully because I opened it upside down earlier today.
Okay, you want the bigger side up.
Okay, so bigger side up.
Let's write that down. Let's write that down because if you open it the wrong way, they all spill out, and it's really annoying because there's 500, right?
100
per. 100 per.
Cool. We're also including some plastic pipettes to add your sample into the cuvette in a nice smooth fashion, and then a nice pipetter kit too.
Yeah, so we included a micro pipette set. So you have 3 Gilmont pipette men. So they'll come in the P1000, P200, and P20 variety, which is kind of the standard that you get in a lab. And it also comes with 1 set of blue tips and 1 set of yellow tips. So the blue tips are for the P1000, and you'll see that this is the P200. It accepts the yellow tips. The kit comes in a nice box, and it includes some really great so the box contains a lot of different elements, and it does include some nice user guides, including like a guide to pipetting. I think, you know, we're always happy to go over this, but when you're using a micro pipette, you want to pick the one that's appropriate for the volume. You'll probably primarily use this to just deliver the metacrysal purple to the cuvette is that right, Kim? Would you agree? And so I think, and what is it, 10 microliter? What's the volume that people are adding? I'm not sure, but you might use the P20 mostly.
I can't remember. It's in the guide, and it depends on the volume of your cuvette. So there's a little table in the guide that depends on the volume of your cell. Because I don't know what size glass ones you've got.
Got it.
You look on the table to see what size your cell is, and then it will tell you what volume of dye to add.
Perfect.
So essentially the way these work is that depending on the volume of the pipette that you select, so this is a P200, meaning the maximum is 200 microliters, and it can pipette between, and it says on the top what the range is. It can pipette between 20 and 200 microliters. And the way that you adjust what that is you actually spin the dial on the top until it reads the number that you're looking for, right? So if you wanted to pipette, 180 microliters, you would spin until you got to that. And then you would attach a tip to the bottom by I don't want to open them because they're sterile, in case you wanted to use them for sterile purposes. But with pipettes, tips, they are reusable. You can re-rack them and then autoclave them to sterilize them if you wanted to use them for like biological experiments. But if you haven't used pipettes, micropipettes before, there's 2 stopping points. So the first stop is where you go down to when you're taking up the liquid. And then the second stop is for releasing the liquid. And you want to get the last drop in. For the micropipettes, they're calibrated so that final drop goes into the liquid. It's a little different than the burette. So just, double check the manuals for kind of making sure you're releasing the volume. But the thing for the cuvette and the metacrysal purple, and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, it's mostly about being consistent with your addition of the dye with the additions. And it's not necessarily that it's exactly 20 microliters, but that it's extremely consistent. So as long as you're doing it consistently each time, that's the most important thing. Is that right, Kim? Okay, great. And then, these should be well calibrated. You can send them back for calibration. Your scales should be accurate to the 100th place. And so you could theoretically do a calibration exercise with your weigh boats and water and, see to the microliter, is it still reading correctly? That could be a little simple calibration exercise you do. But these pipette men should be useful in your lab for other purposes as well. So hopefully they enable you to do other research as well.
Cool. So to complement the rest of the spec pH system, we of course include the metacrysal purple, which comes in a powder form, and then the supplies needed to make it up into the dye solution. These pH solutions are a new addition as of 2 weeks or so ago to the kits. They're not in yours. This might be something if you can find it locally with your research stipend, or if not, you can reach out. We're still working on the guidance for using this to calibrate or to get an understanding of how the metronome pH electrode is working, so you can properly adjust the pH of your dye solution. You might remember when we were at USP, they already had a pH electrode that we were able to use. We can use the one in the kit used for total alkalinity. We just need to understand how it's performing first.
You will also use these stir bars when you're mixing the metacrysal purple. So these little teeny tiny stir bars. are in here and your stir plate. So they're going to be used when you're doing the titration, but you can also use them to get a nice clean mix of your metacrystal purple powder into the solution.
And then there are the sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid to adjust the pH of the dye solution. The scale that Alexis has been mentioning to weigh out the powder and also check the calibration of the pipetters, micropipetters if needed. And then a couple of odds and ends for the lab. So scoop out the powder with the spatula into the little weigh boat. Use a funnel that's included somewhere around here to put it into the flask with stopper and store the dye as well. And then, of course, down at the very bottom here is the tris buffer, coming straight from the Dixon lab at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, that has a known pH depending on temperature. So there's a table to reference depending on what the temperature of your tris buffer is, to then be able to measure the pH, and you can double check your spec pH measurements using that reference material. You can make tris buffer yourself, or a lab can. There are recipes in a paper, but we provide the tris buffer that's already made up because it's a lot more simple, to do that and to know the value that the lab is ascribing to it. Kim, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say we've included the tris buffer recipe in the best practice, but then I wondered if that was actually the case. I did a rethink, but I think we do provide the recipe for the tris buffer. If you've got access to a really good analytical lab, then you can make good tris buffer yourself, but you have to be able to do that very, very carefully.
Thanks, Kim. Any questions right now on the spec pH items? Okie dokie. Moving on to total alkalinity. The first item there is the multimeter, which we don't have right now on hand. We do have a couple of the important maintenance or repair items for that, which is the fuses. So as we shared with the electricity guidelines, the multimeter can either be switched between 120 volts or 240. You have to look at the very back of it and look at the fuse and pull it out and flip it around. So that's an important piece when you unpack the multimeter, is to very carefully check what voltage it thinks it should be accepting. Plugged into the wrong sort of power fries the fuses. We do include backups now. So if that does happen, this little tiny piece won't hinder your research anymore, because you can replace it with the backup ones that we include. But we've also included the power transformer, which will be a little bit lower on this list. That's an important item to plug the multimeter into, not only because it will transform the power to the 120 volts, you still should do that flip of the fuse just in case one day you forget and plug it directly into the wall at the adapter.
Well, you actually want it to be in 120. So you don't want to flip it. So double check. So it will probably be set to 120 because it's coming from the United States. So you can just confirm it and kind of familiarize yourself with it, right? Because that is where the fuse is. So if you do need to replace the fuse at any point, it's nice to just know it where it is. That is in the manual. That's how I learned where it was, because I had to flip the fuse at one point. That said, so in theory, if you wanted to plug it straight into your wall, you would want to turn it up, pull it out and flip it over to the 240 side. There's a reason we don't want you to do that though.
It's because stable power is really important for the multimeter, right? It's reading the electrical current or voltage, electrical terms that are coming off the pH electrode. So that stability is incredibly important for a good total alkalinity reading. And knowing that all of our power coming out of the wall may be fluctuating, may have surges, may have bursts, etc. We include this transformer because it also includes a power regulator as well. So it keeps that power coming to the multimeter very stable and allows the variances that it's seeing from the electrode to really be read, and then to be able to convert that to a good output for total alkalinity. So always should be plugged in to that power regulator / transformer.
And then you just don't have to worry about it. And, you know, I can't remember if there's I think there might be like 2 outlets available on that step down transformer.
There's a couple.
There's a couple. So you can choose to plug in some of your other devices. There aren't that many devices that need to be used at a time, right? Your stir plate and your multimeter are kind of the 2 devices you'll be using at a time for your alkalinity, your spectrophotometer. So if you're concerned about the stability, like the stabilization of your electricity, you can certainly use that step down. Basically all of the devices you're receiving can be used at 120 or 240 volts. It's only the multimeter that requires you to do that swap in order for it to know like which voltage to use. All of the other ones are what you call dual voltage compliant. So like they will take whatever's coming from the wall and use it. It's just the multimeter that the fuse will break, but that's why we provide these extra fuses. So in case for some reason you accidentally plug it in and the fuse breaks, there are extras. They're not expensive fuses. It's just a pain if you don't have one and you need to flip it. But if you're ever sitting there wondering, you know, that's why we included this guide of the electrical side. And if it for all of these, we also have this universal, you know, power adapter. And this will not change the voltage, right? It's like any power adapter. It'll just change the plug type. So we do our best to try and make sure that the devices we're getting you work. But sometimes the plugs are only available in the US style. And so we have this universal plug adapter, but then we also provide this step down transformer and stabilizer because it just provides that extra bit of security to protect your electronics and also make sure that your data is really solid.
The other consideration for the multimeter when it comes is that it's got some cool extras in the box. So hang on to that. It has some great guidance in there, but it also has a couple of cables. So the multimeter can function as a voltmeter, which would be helpful for troubleshooting the iSAMI. So Christina and I have some pictures of this I can share from the training where if you remember, if you take off the external cover of the iSAMI, it's got a little internal battery in there that sometimes goes bad or isn't functioning. So you can use your multimeter cables to actually get a reading on that battery and understand if it's functional or not. So that's exciting. There's, you know, some neat crossover between different pieces of the kit that can help you troubleshoot other parts.
Exactly.
And then what connects to the multimeter is?
Yeah, so when you set up so to be honest, when it comes to setting up the kit, the piece that's going to take the most time to set up is the alkalinity titration. The video is really helpful for this because there's actually a screenshot kind of in the video where it labels all of the components. And we are also very happy to do a Zoom call with you to kind of walk you through it. So there's a few things that plug into the multimeter. The electrode itself is from Metron. It's going to come in a box that looks like this. You'll also receive a maintenance kit that's just kind of for helping ensure that the filling solution and cleaning solution. There's a cable that comes with this, but then there's an adapter cord to connect this cable. But additionally, there's a preamplifier to make sure that the signal from the pH probe is in the right, you know,
it boosts
it before it gets to the multimeter. This is a lot to remember right now. You don't have to remember it. That's why we have the practical best practices. That's why we've got the video, and that's why we're here as a resource so that as you're setting it up. But we just want you to know there's going to be a lot of little pieces with setting up the alkalinity, and we are happy to help you. You know, there's a lot of component pieces. There are diagrams that are labeled. You know, the electrode is fairly expensive and fairly delicate. It also can start to kind of go bad. So this is a piece that in a few years you might want to replace. That said, for the weather quality measurements, I think there might be a longer lifetime on these rather than like climate quality where you're trying to see really small changes over a really long period of time. But that's something that, you know, your mentor and the center can advise you on when you're saying, is my data still getting what I need? And that's where the reference materials really come into play, because you know what the number is supposed to be on these things. And if you're not achieving that with your instruments, you can start to question, is there something wrong? One other
one more thing.
important thing. Oh, I was going to talk about it in Vera.
Can I talk about the
Yes.
sensor? The
Yeah.
So one thing is with the preamplifier, it has an internal battery as well. We found that this dies either after a couple of years or after some use. We don't quite know yet. You can buy it off of Amazon here in the US. I'm not sure how available that is in other countries. But this is something that previous kit users have found that they need to replace periodically as well. You'll find that it's not functioning basically when the multimeter readings are all over the place. That's a sign that it's gone dead, but this is something you might anticipate, having an issue with down the line.
And it's not extremely expensive. It's about $100 US. And so the other thing is, you'll receive a stipend, and that's the kind of thing that you could say, okay, we need to order this. And we're hoping we're going to try and have spare parts, but because this might have a shelf life, it doesn't really matter if there's a spare part in Fiji if it's going to go bad. So it's the kind of thing you need to be able to order at the time that you need it. So hopefully having those funds in hand, if in a couple of years you find yourself needing to replace it, you can hopefully find a way to get it in your country. And if you can't, contact us and we'll see if we can help.
Yeah, we've tried to include backups of things we expect you might go through fairly quickly. It's just that we don't know. It probably needs to be freshly manufactured.
So I'm going to talk about this device, and I'm going to say that this is the burette, and I guess it's further down on the list. Sorry, I skipped. Oh, it's not on here anymore for a reason. So the manufacturer stopped making these. We cannot get them anymore. We have a few left over, and they are going to you. They're breakable, and they're literally irreplaceable because we cannot order them anymore. And they come in these funky boxes that are hard to open, and in 2 pieces that you have to screw together. So I want, if you're concerned at all, feel free to call us. Basically, it's got these weird little like metal things, and you have to lift them up like this. So you probably can't see. We'll take pictures. You have to lift them up in order for the box to release.
Be straight up, maybe?
It's straight up. It's just you have to lift them both up in order for the box to release. But it's not easy to get it up.
Do they go straight?
It does go straight.
No,
Oh, do they go?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, you're right.
it's tricky.
And then once you open it, it actually is in 2 pieces. So I don't want to so it's in 2 pieces where the screw top and the glass part are separate. So you have to connect those 2 pieces. So, it's not gonna break when you touch it. Just handle it with care, because it is so nice. This device is like the perfect thing for running the titration, because you just spin it and it's great, and they just don't make it anymore. And so we've got what we've got, and you're getting what's left, and there's no way for us to get more as far as we know. What's replacing it is going to be something like the micropipetter, and that's fine, but this is just so nice and straightforward, and you just spin the dial and it just dispenses the acid. And so just beware,
because you can double check yourself, right? If you add another 0.05 of acid and you forget to do the multimeter reading after it's stabilized, you can be like double check what it says on the barrel and be like, oh yeah, I added that, or I've done this many additions. When you're using something where you're dosing it and not getting that feedback of every time you do it, it could be possible to forget to input that in the Excel sheet while you're doing it at the same time, and lead to ultimately a not good value of total alkalinity at the end. That's why we really like that one.
The other thing that we have in our office is the jacketed beaker. So this is what you'll actually be using with your sample in it to do the titration. And it has these 2 things that you'll use a closed loop of Tygon tubing. That's just to really stabilize the temperature while you're running your titration. And this is glass. You'll receive, I think, at least 2. And there's backups of these. I haven't really, people don't seem to break this doesn't seem to be an issue as far as breaking easily. We don't have any of them, but the glass pipettes you use to deliver your sample here, those do break really easily, but we do provide a number of those. Yeah.
Oh, it'll be filled with water, by the way. So once you get it, you'll use the Tygon tubing to create a closed loop, and then just fill this up with the water for the temperature stabilization.
Yeah, so the jacket part will be filled with water. And then this will have your stir bar in it, and it'll be sitting on your stir plate. And then the pH probe and the burette will be inside, held up by the ring stands. And you'll also have the Kim wipes, which will really help you, keep everything clean, keep things free of debris, and ready for new samples and for proper readings.
Yeah. Cool. We've also included the acid for the titration as well. So to start off with, we've included calibrated acid coming from, again, the Dixon lab at Scripps Oceanography that has a very well-known or precisely measured, accurately measured acid concentration on it that can be inputted into your calculation spreadsheet. And so that isn't going to be a source of variation as you're doing those first couple of samples. Of course, that 1 liter will eventually run out, and that's when we've provided backup hydrochloric acid that needs to be diluted to the proper concentration. Yeah, no, 0.1.
0.1.
Yes.
Yeah, a comment on that. That has to be, there's the recipe for doing that. There's the instructions on the diluted as well, and there's instructions in the best practice guide. But it is very, very important to follow those instructions to the letter and don't skip on any step of that, because the value of the alkalinity that you get is very, very dependent on the value of the acid that you use. So if the concentration of the acid is wrong, if it's out by even 0.01 or 0.001 moles per kilogram, then your titration value will be miles out. It's very, very sensitive. You have to be very careful with that acid. So warning. And if you start to get when you do the alkalinity and you measure a CRM and it's way out, then that's probably the answer, especially if you're consistently way out by more or less the same amount. And then you should contact your mentor for a bit of a hand on that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something we've seen with our kit recipients, and also evaporation can be an issue. So when you're storing your acid, being very careful to prevent evaporation. Because you can be being extremely careful with your measurements and still be getting the wrong number because the acid isn't at the proper concentration. And so that's also why we provide this Dixon titration acid for your first set of measurements, so that you can know that you can really get your methods down and you're not so worried about the acid. And then over time, if you're finding that there's errors, you can be a little bit more sure. Basically, what we're finding is it's usually the preamplifier or the acid. If someone's having issues with their alkalinity, that are pretty consistent and by a large margin, it's usually the preamplifier needs to be replaced or the acid concentration has somehow gone off.
Even just, swirling the acid as it's closed at the beginning of the day is important, because that little bit of evaporation or a little bit of water on the, the top can be an issue. So yes, hopefully the calibrated acid gets you on your way. If you start to find issues as you've made your own acid, we can talk about how to, adjust or remake it so it's appropriate concentration. And to do that, we have, the 1 liter flask with appropriate markings, and the pipette as well. Down here is where we don't include the CyberPower UPS system anymore. We bumped everyone up to the step-down transformer, which is what the multimeter should be plugged into. It's quite heavy, so that will be, when you open up your box, something that is probably at the bottom of it. And then these adapters as well. To support, other measurements that you're going to need for to do your CO2 sys calculations, we're including a salinity pen, so you can measure the salinity of your sample, as well as standards to do calibration for that salinity pen too. And then we have reference materials from the Dixon lab for total alkalinity. So that comes with a certified value that you can find online The box may include like the website link for that, but we can also point you towards it so you know what the value of your reference material for that particular batch should be, and the value that you should be getting out when you're running that reference material in between your own samples, and then can understand again how close or far you are. We don't include these quick disconnect tube couplings for anyone right now because it's only for those who have a water bath, so you won't see that in your kit. Any questions on the total alkalinity system?
No, but I just have a point here because, as I said in the chat, we're submitting our data to the SDG 14.3 today, and we've started going through to make sure that we have all the appropriate metadata. And so one of the things that it asks you when you submit your data to SDG, this is down the line, of course, it asks you for the CRM batch number that you used. So when you record in your notebook the your titration data, record the number of the batch that's on the bottle that you get, and you'll also have to put some information about the correction that you did. So how you use the CRM to then adjust your alkalinity value. You need to put all that data when you submit it to the UN SDG 14.3. So make sure you keep good notes of all of these different steps as you go along and do the titrations.
Thank you for that reminder, Kim. That's incredibly important. Great.
Yeah, and if you're like overwhelmed by any of this, like that's what we're here for, right? And that's what your mentor is here for, to help with these little steps along the way.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that brings us down to our second to last section. I know we're at the top of the hour, so if you have to hop up, feel free to do so. Again, we'll send this recording around. But that brings us to sort of the things that we think are helpful to have around the laboratory and support the use of the kit. So the first is parafilm, which is sort of like that fancy science cling wrap. This would be great for sealing the total alkalinity acid in between, you know, those measurement batch days to help prevent the evaporation, sealing any other chemicals as well. It's also just sort of fun if you're having a stressful day in the lab to get a little piece. Kim wipes, of course, to clean any. Bye, Kim. To clean the cuvettes, you know, wipe off drops of sample before you seal the sample bottle in the lab, or sorry, out in the field. Lots of different uses for those Kim wipes. Drying off the sample bottles after they've been cleaned so the water residue isn't sitting on them, etc. Next item are gloves, of course, because we're using acid, we're using the mercuric chloride. Wearing gloves is good practice. And we've ordered the size that you specified back when we went and customized the kit. So we'll be seeing those come to you. We'll include cable ties, which is great for when you're out in the field and securing the CTD diver and the ISAMI to the frame that you're going to use, and just, you know, handy out in the field in general. Lab tape. You'll get, I think, 2 or 3 of these in different colors. This is great for writing on and properly labeling the sample bottles. So before we went out on the boat when we were in Fiji, you know, we spent a good bit of time in the lab making sure that we had prepped our bottles. So when we were out there, it's very easy to fill them. And remember the dates, you know, the sample location we were at, all those bits of metadata that are really important. You can record on your lab tape and then label things in the lab too. So as you've created the dye solution, properly label that, label the mercuric chloride, sample dispenser. Everything good happens with lab tape. We have some wash bottles as well, so you can spray off some of the pH electrode in between measurements, or to clean that off, to spray out, you know, other bits, like rinse the cuvette in between measurements, etc. We have a all-purpose notebook. This is waterproof, so it's great for taking out in the field and collecting the metadata. Pencil is probably the best writing utensil to use on this based on how the paper is manufactured, but you can splash this. You can get, you know, a little bit of salt water if you're, you know, taking notes while you're doing your bottle sampling, and it should still stay legible. But it could also be used in the lab too. If this is the notebook that you want all of your OA research data to live in, you can bring it back and forth and, you know, make notes on what you're doing in the lab and what you're doing in the field in this one notebook. And then we've also included some tape to wrap around the sensors like the ICME, because we know you might contend with biofouling. And so while that can take some scrubbing in between deployments, wrapping those sensors in tape, either electrical tape or copper tape is sort of the even better option there, is easy because you can just sort of unwrap that when you're out in the field and very quickly remove all the, the CCA that's growing, any barnacles, other, organisms that have decided to make that their home really quickly with just a quick unwrap. So it's easier than, taking a bristle and getting it off manually. Cool. And then the very last thing we're going to chat about is the mercury filtration system. So this is the system that you'll set up and will be able to deal with the remnants of your samples in the lab after you've done the total alkalinity, after you've done the spec pH, and you may have still a little bit in your bottle sample. That can be poured into a carboy, which we haven't supplied, but we have the taps. So you can drill a little hole in a bucket, put your tap in there, and then connect tubing to the actual, thank you. So this will just connect to a bucket and seal really well. And then from that, they'll have a tubing that runs from the spigot to this housing that will have barbed connectors to connect it to the housing. You'll have to assemble this when you get it. So there's a couple different components here. There's the actual housing for the filter, and then a specific filter for mercury. So this is like any sort of general, filter that you might use, even like under your kitchen sink if you're so inclined, for things like removing chlorine or whatever. This is a special filter though that is particular for mercury. It's made of a resin. It's got, I believe, the inflow in the bottom, the outflow through the top, not entirely sure, but water is going one way through it and filtering out that mercury. There will be two of these housings that are connected via these little pieces. You'll screw them together, and the two housings will be removing all of the mercury that's in your sample. That will then flow out from another tube into another carboy, another bucket, and then we'll include test strips so you can actually test and ensure that there's no mercury left before dumping that the mercury-free now seawater in whatever guidance is provided by your institution. And of course, with that support that we hope to provide on the protocols for actually dealing with it.
So then, oh, go ahead.
There are a couple of maintenance pieces. So the filter housing needs an O-ring. So we've included that. There's also some silicone lubricant to apply to the O-ring here to create that watertight seal. So you won't have any issues with water coming out the top. To change out the filters, which we think should be good for quite a long time. Again, we're not having a lot of mercury in our sample. We're including two filters. You'll be able to tell when those filters are going out because your test strips will start reading mercury again. But to open up the top, we'll just use this hinge. No, it goes down here. There we go. So you'll hold the top and you use this little thing to twist it apart. You can also release the pressure before you open it by pressing the red button on top too, and that'll make sure it'll drain out the system so it's not like spurting water on you. So all those little maintenance pieces are included with the filtration system.
And then the neat thing is, basically at that point, all that water is now mercury free. So all of the mercury is now here. And so this is the only, and it's all captured in this resin. So this is the only piece that you have to dispose of. And so what we're going to be working on is a protocol for the disposal of this. And so that might be, in the case of a smaller country, the hazardous shipping of this to a country that has mercury disposal facilities. And so in that case, it might be perhaps shipping to New Zealand or Australia or the US, where there's a regulated facility that can do the disposal of the resin, and just having, a portion of that stipend set aside for shipping. But this, because you're using such a small amount of mercury, it should last you for quite a long time. And so as long as you've got the system set up in your lab and your test strips are still reading 0, it's really just this that someday will require proper disposal, and we will, that's what we're working on creating the protocol for.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our list. You know, of course, we say we can't really ship buckets very easily, so that's why we've included the spigot to connect to a bucket that you may find locally. You know, something just from a hardware store is totally appropriate for that. You know, maybe somewhere to put your bottles as they're drying, and something to soak the bottles with the cleaner in as well. So that's just this list at the bottom here. That brings us to everything that we've included in the GOA-ON box kits. We know it's a lot, right? It's over 90 unique items in each of your kits. And so we are here to provide that guidance when it arrives to your institution. You can watch this over, can look at the videos with Chris and see how he set up his system. But we're also happy to provide, you know, more insight there. If you open something up and you're like, I really don't know what this is or where it goes, send us an email. We can hop on a video call and look through it with you.
Yeah.
Anything else to add? Cool.
And this is recorded, so you can
Yes.
watch this again if you want, but also we are live and able to do this again in some ways. We might not have the equipment with us, but if you have it, we can say the same things and walk you through it.
Yeah. Our goal is to help you do your research, and we understand that it's, again, a lot of components, and we want to be able to support as we can to make your research as easy as possible, knowing that you're doing a lot of different things, right? You're in class or teaching class, you're studying your whole breadth of research that you have. And I know this is just a component of it. And so we don't want to make the startup more difficult than it has to be.
And Azaria, I want to point out that
Yeah.
Azaria is really a resource for you. She couldn't be here today, but she has been really focusing on refining her skills using the kit that's in Fiji so that she can also be your go-to person for, okay, I'm having trouble with this, because her goal is to really familiarize herself with these systems. And so that she can be your in-region go-to person along with the team at SPC and USP. And if you find yourself in Suva and you want to do a little, you know, refresher, like that's there for you. The SPC team and the USB team are there to kind of do some, you know, catch up training together.
Yeah. All right. Any questions before we close this out?
No, I don't have anything. Thank you so much for, I think, yeah, it's kind of refreshing for me as well. Because almost 1 year we had the training. So yeah, and I really thank you for compiling all the information that, especially for troubleshooting, that will be very helpful. So thank you so much for everything that you said today.
Thank you, Lyndon. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
We think the kits are going to go out so soon. We're just waiting for like the confirmation that they're ready to go from the shipper. Like all the paper, we've sent all the paperwork. Everything is there in its box, ready to go.
I will keep emailing them frequently.
Like it could be a matter of weeks. I mean, really.
We'll even saying that. Yeah. We'll get it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
Right?
Happy holidays.
Next month.
Likely. I don't think we will have another community meeting before the holidays. I think there might be one somewhere in a week or 2 or 3 weeks, but we'll likely cancel.
We'll be in touch.
Yes.
We'll be in touch
Okay.
as we plan with Azaria when the next one will be. We want these to be useful to you. So if there's not anything scheduled, also if you have an idea of a topic, please reach out to us and Azaria. If there's something in particular you want to go over, but we don't want to have them if there's nothing useful. So just let us know.
Yeah.
You can use the WhatsApp group or email, whatever you prefer.
Sure.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.